The sound of the shredder buzzing through the quiet of a Saturday morning was louder than any alarm clock. My wife stood by the counter, her face calm but her hands determined as she pushed the folded yellow sheet of paper straight into the hungry blades. Strip by strip, the notice disappeared. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was the latest in a string of ridiculous HOA fines we had been dealing with ever since we moved into this neighborhood. This one claimed that our lawn was half an inch taller than HOA standards allowed. Half an inch. That was enough, in their eyes, to charge us $150. My wife didn't even hesitate. She simply smiled, muttered, "Not today," and shredded the fine into oblivion. What she didn't realize, though, was that across the street, standing like a sentry behind her ever-polished mailbox, Karen had been watching everything. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the self-declared queen of the HOA. She lived for control, for rules, for catching someone breaking a guideline. She was the type who counted trash bins left outside past 7:01 a.m. and measured the length of your grass with a tape measure. And when she saw my wife shred that fine, her eyes widened like she had just witnessed treason. Karen gasped so loudly I could hear it from the porch where I was sipping my coffee. She clutched her pearls, literally, she always wore them, and rushed down her walkway with her phone already pressed against her ear. Her voice carried across the street, shrill and dramatic, like a stage actress performing for an invisible audience. "Hello, yes, I need the police immediately. My neighbors are destroying legal documents. They are hostile, defiant, and disrupting the order of our community." I nearly spit out my coffee. Destroying legal documents? Hostile? All my wife had done was shred a bogus piece of paper that Karen herself had likely pushed under our door at dawn. To anyone else, it was a harmless act. But to Karen, it was rebellion against the very empire she thought she ruled. My wife glanced at me, eyes sparkling with mischief. "She's actually calling the cops," she said, half amused and half annoyed. "Of course she is," I replied. For Karen, this is her version of war. The truth was, Karen had been on our case since day one. The moment we moved in, she paraded over with her HOA handbook clutched in her hand like it was the Bible. She rattled off rules about mailbox colors, approved mulch, and even how long holiday decorations could stay up. She looked at me and my wife like we were wild animals who needed taming. I brushed her off politely then, but she never forgot that I didn't bow to her authority. And since then, every chance she got, she made sure a fine or a notice appeared on our property. But this morning, things were different. Something inside me told me this wouldn't end the way Karen imagined. Because unlike her, I had lived through real conflicts, commanded real authority, and faced situations far beyond shredded papers and manicured lawns. Karen thought she was pulling the biggest lever of power in her arsenal by calling the police. What she didn't realize was that the moment the police arrived, she would be stepping into a world she wasn't prepared for, a world where her petty rules meant absolutely nothing. From across the street, I could see her pacing in her driveway, barking into her phone, throwing glances our way as if she were gathering evidence. She pointed toward us dramatically, gesturing with her free hand like she was describing hardened criminals. A few neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, whispering and chuckling at the familiar scene. Karen calling the cops wasn't new, but today she looked more desperate than ever, like she was sure this was the moment she'd finally bring us down. I leaned against the porch rail, coffee in hand, and watched her little performance. My wife, still by the shredder, picked up the remaining scraps of paper and tossed them into the trash. She looked utterly unbothered, which only fueled Karen's fury more. I could practically feel her blood pressure rising from here. Then I heard it, the distant wail of a siren growing louder by the second. Karen straightened immediately, her whole demeanor changing from enraged neighbor to triumphant queen. She smoothed her blouse, stood taller, and marched to the edge of her driveway as the flashing lights turned onto our street. To her, this was victory. She thought reinforcements had finally arrived, her authority backed by the weight of the law. My wife sighed, crossing her arms. She really thinks we're about to be arrested for a shredded fine, she muttered. Let her think it, I said with a smile. She has no idea what's coming. Because in that moment, I remembered something Karen didn't know and could never predict. I wasn't just another homeowner on this block. I wasn't just a man with a coffee cup watching his wife stand her ground. I had spent 3 decades serving this country, rising through the ranks, earning every stripe, every star, every salute. And there were men and women in uniform across this city who remembered my name, who remembered my leadership. Karen thought she was bringing in the cavalry to fight her battle. But the truth was, the cavalry already knew who I was. And when that cruiser stopped at the curb, she was about to learn it the hard way. The police car rolled to a stop, lights still flashing. Karen beamed like she had personally summoned justice itself. She began waving frantically, pointing at us like she had caught the culprits of the century. My wife raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, while I simply took another sip of coffee. The show was just getting started, and I had the best seat in the house. The police cruiser pulled up to the curb with its lights spinning, painting the neighborhood in red and blue flashes. Karen practically skipped toward the car like a child on Christmas morning. She was glowing with satisfaction, one hand clutching her phone and the other waving wildly at the officer. I could hear her rehearsing her lines under her breath, ready to deliver her case like she was the prosecutor in a high-profile trial. My wife leaned against the railing, her arms crossed, watching with the same calm patience she always had whenever Karen cooked up one of her theatrics. I stayed on the porch, coffee still in hand, waiting. The officer stepped out of the car. He was tall, built like someone who had seen more than his share of action, and he carried himself with the steady authority of a man who didn't scare easily. His hand rested casually near his belt as he scanned the scene. Karen rushed forward, her voice shrill, loud enough to wake anyone still in bed. Officer! Officer, thank goodness you're here. You need to arrest them immediately. They're hostile, uncooperative, and they destroyed legal HOA documents right in front of me. She pointed toward our house like she had just uncovered a criminal hideout. Her voice trembled with righteous fury, but there was also a smugness there. She was certain the law was finally going to bend to her will. The officer gave her a slow nod, jotting something on his notepad, but his eyes didn't linger on her. Instead, he looked past her, scanning toward me on the porch. For a moment, his gaze locked with mine, and I saw something flicker across his face. Confusion at first. Then realization. Then something much deeper. He froze in his tracks, staring at me as if I were someone he hadn't expected to see. Wait, his voice dropped, the firmness giving way to shock. General Blake? Karen blinked, her face contorting in confusion. She turned back toward the officer, flapping her hands in the air. What? No, you're mistaken. That's just my neighbor. He's defiant, rude, and refuses to follow the HOA rules. He shredded an official notice. He's a troublemaker, not some general. But the officer wasn't paying attention to her anymore. His posture straightened. His pen stopped moving. His eyes stayed fixed on me. I set my coffee cup down on the railing and slowly walked down the steps, my boots crunching against the gravel. My wife smirked from behind me, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "Here it comes." The officer stepped forward, disbelief etched into his face. "Sir. General Blake, is it really you?" Karen's jaw dropped. She spun back and forth between the officer and me, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. General? What general? You can't be serious. This man is nothing but a thorn in the HOA's side. The officer ignored her, his eyes locked on me. Sir, I served under you. Afghanistan. 2007, you were our commanding officer. You got my entire squad out of that ambush in Kandahar. We never forgot you." His voice faltered for just a moment, filled with memories only those who served could understand. Karen's smugness drained from her face. She shook her head violently, refusing to accept it. "No. No, this is ridiculous. You're confusing him with someone else. He's a homeowner who refuses to follow lawn regulations, nothing more." My wife laughed quietly, unable to resist the moment. The officer, however, wasn't smiling. His expression carried the weight of respect, the kind you couldn't fake. He took a step closer and straightened his back. Then, in front of Karen, in front of the entire block peeking through their windows, he raised his hand and gave me a crisp salute. The street went silent except for the faint hum of the cruiser's engine. I nodded in return, my voice steady as I said, "At ease, son. You've done well." Karen stumbled backward, her face pale. She looked like the ground beneath her had just vanished. All her confidence, her theatrics, her smug pride evaporated in an instant. She had called the cops to try and crush us, but what she had summoned was someone who knew exactly who I was, someone who owed me his life. She had no power here anymore, and she knew it. My wife walked down the steps and joined me at my side, her smile growing wider. "So," she said, glancing at Karen, "are we still criminals for shredding your little notice?" Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stuttered, sputtered, and pointed helplessly at the officer as though begging him to restore the balance of power. You can't just let him get away with this. This is an HOA violation. He's mocking the rules. He's mocking me." The officer finally turned back to her, his expression calm but sharp. "Ma'am, shredding an HOA fine is not a criminal act. HOA notices are civil matters, not law enforcement issues. Calling 911 for something like this is a misuse of emergency services." His voice hardened. "And for the record, I'd suggest you stop harassing your neighbors with false reports. Do I make myself clear?" Karen froze, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't argue. The authority she thought she wielded so easily had been ripped from her hands and crushed in front of her. She took a step back, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her dignity. The neighbors, still peeking from their blinds and porches, were already whispering, already sharing the story that would spread like wildfire through the community. The great HOA queen, silenced by a single name. Karen shook her head, muttered something about unbelievable corruption, and stormed back toward her driveway, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. She couldn't look at me, couldn't look at the officer, couldn't face anyone. Her empire had crumbled. The officer turned back to me, his tone softening once again. "Sir, I didn't mean to intrude on your morning. I was just responding to the call. But it's an honor to see you again. Truly." My wife slipped her hand into mine, squeezing gently. She didn't need to say anything, I knew exactly what she was thinking. Karen had just been dealt the humiliation of her life, and this was only the beginning. The officer gave me one last nod before heading back to his cruiser. The flashing lights dimmed, the engine rumbled, and the car slowly pulled away, leaving Karen standing by her garage with her face red as fire. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the silence was filled with something new, the knowledge that Karen had finally met her match. And as I walked back onto the porch, my coffee still warm, I couldn't help but smile. She thought the police would save her cause. Instead, she had just handed me the greatest victory of all. The street had gone eerily quiet after the officer saluted me and returned to his cruiser, but the silence was loaded with unspoken tension. Karen stood frozen in her driveway, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, but no words came out. Her confidence, her certainty, her smug superiority, all of it had drained away in an instant. She had expected to see me in handcuffs, maybe dragged into the back of the squad car like a criminal. Instead, she just witnessed the officer salute me with a respect she could never command. My wife slipped her arm through mine as we stood there, both of us watching Karen's desperate attempts to piece her shattered pride back together. The officer's words still lingered in the air. Shredding an HOA fine isn't a crime. Karen looked like she'd been slapped across the face. She finally found her voice, though it cracked with anger. This is outrageous. He can't just ignore the HOA. These rules are what keep this community safe, clean, and civilized. Without them, everything falls apart. He thinks he's above the law just because of some title. She practically spat the word title, as if being called general was some kind of trick I had orchestrated to humiliate her. My wife chuckled under her breath, shaking her head. Karen, the only thing falling apart here is your act. The officer told you clearly, HOA notices are not criminal matters. We can shred them, frame them, wallpaper the house with them if we want to. What are you going to do now? Call the FBI? The jab hit her hard. Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. She stomped her foot like a frustrated child, her pearls bouncing against her chest. She looked around, desperate for support from the neighbors who were watching through their blinds and cracked doors. But no one came to her defense. They had all seen too many of her antics, too many of her false alarms and melodramatic episodes. This time, her humiliation was too complete, too public. I stepped forward, my voice calm but deliberate, the same tone I used countless times leading soldiers in the field. Karen, let me explain something. For 30 years, I dealt with rules that mattered, rules that meant the difference between life and death. I commanded men and women who trusted me with their lives. You think a shredded HOA fine means chaos? Let me tell you something. Real chaos is gunfire cutting through the night. Real chaos is trying to keep your people alive when the odds are stacked against you. This, I gestured toward the trash can where the fine now rested in shredded strips, isn't chaos. This is you trying to control people with nonsense. And that ends here. Her eyes widened, but instead of backing down, she shook her head furiously. You think you can intimidate me with war stories? This is a neighborhood, not a battlefield. She jabbed her finger toward me like she was delivering the final word in some courtroom drama. I am the elected head of the HOA, and you will respect my authority. My wife burst out laughing, the sound sharp and cutting. Respect? Karen, respect is earned, not demanded. You can hand out all the fines you want, but all you've earned is everyone's eye rolls. Karen's hands trembled, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But instead, she twisted her face into something uglier, more determined. You think this is over? Fine, maybe the police won't arrest you. But the HOA has power. We can lien your house, take legal action, ruin your credit. You're not untouchable just because you like to brag about your military past. Her words didn't sting, they revealed something deeper. Karen wasn't just angry, she was threatened. The very foundation of her identity as the neighborhood enforcer was crumbling, and she was scrambling to remind herself she still had teeth. I took a step closer, my shadow stretching across her driveway. Karen, I don't need to brag. My record speaks for itself. The officer who just left, he remembered me because I kept him and his squad alive when the odds said they shouldn't have made it out. That's not bragging. That's history. What you're doing, harassing your neighbors with fines and nonsense, that's not power. That's desperation. The neighbors' blinds shifted, more faces peeking out now, hungry for the drama. Karen realized her humiliation was now the neighborhood's entertainment. She tried to recover, standing taller, her chin raised. You'll regret this, she hissed. The HOA is bigger than you. You can't fight the system. I smiled, not with malice but with calm certainty. Karen, I've fought systems bigger than you can imagine. And I've beaten them. If you think I'm going to be intimidated by a piece of paper and you're shouting, then you've learned nothing. My wife stepped forward, joining me in the final blow. She pulled another crumpled fine from the mailbox, because of course Karen had dropped off more than one, and without breaking eye contact with Karen, she fed it right into the shredder she had dragged onto the porch. The buzzing filled the air again, louder this time, more deliberate. Strip by strip, the second notice vanished. The crowd of neighbors who had been silent until now couldn't help themselves. A burst of laughter broke out from somewhere down the block. A door creaked open and someone muttered, "About time someone put her in her place." Another voice chuckled, "General Blake, huh? No wonder she lost." Karen's face contorted. She spun around, realizing that her audience wasn't supporting her, they were mocking her. Every shred of control she thought she had over this neighborhood slipped away like sand through her fingers. She clutched her pearls one last time, muttered something about ungrateful people, and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered down the street. I turned to my wife, who was still smiling, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Well," I said quietly, "that's one way to spend a Saturday morning." She laughed and leaned into me. "Think she'll try again?" "Of course she will," I replied. "Karen doesn't know how to quit. But now the whole block knows she can't touch us. And more importantly, she knows too." The sun broke through the clouds overhead, casting warm light across the street. Neighbors stepped out, pretending they were just checking their mail or watering their lawns, but their smiles told the truth. They had witnessed the dethroning of the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. And as I picked up my coffee cup again, still half full and still warm, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen would plot, scheme, and try again. But every time she did, she'd remember the look on that officer's face, the sound of the salute, and the truth that shook her to her core: she had no power here. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the neighborhood in warm gold, but the air still carried the tension of the showdown that had unfolded hours earlier. My wife and I sat together on the porch swing, the shredded scraps of the HOA fine still resting in the trash bin beside us. Every so often, I'd catch a curtain twitch across the street or a neighbor, casually, strolling by, clearly hoping to catch another glimpse of what might happen next. Karen's storm back into her house had been loud and theatrical, but silence had followed. A silence that felt unnatural, like the calm before another storm. My wife leaned her head on my shoulder, chuckling softly. "You know she's in there plotting. She's not the type to just let this go." I smiled faintly, swirling the last sip of coffee at the bottom of my mug. "Of course she's plotting. People like Karen don't quit. Control is the only thing she knows. But after what happened today, every plan she makes is going to feel smaller, weaker. She'll come at us again, but it won't be the same." She shifted to look at me, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "Do you ever think about how different this is from what you used to face? I mean, one day you're strategizing against enemy forces overseas, and now your biggest battle is against Karen and her HOA handbook." I let out a quiet laugh, though there was a weight behind it. War zones and HOA board meetings aren't as different as you'd think. There's always someone who wants control, who believes rules give them power. The difference is, back then, the stakes were life and death. Here, it's fines and appearances. But people like Karen, people who crave power, they'll use whatever weapons they have, even if it's a tape measure and a clipboard. As if on cue, the sound of Karen's door slamming open echoed across the street. She emerged like a storm cloud, her pearl necklace glinting in the fading light, her posture stiff and defiant. She carried a thick binder clutched to her chest, the HOA rulebook, no doubt, and her face was set with a grim determination. My wife groaned under her breath. "Here we go again. Round 2. Karen marched to the edge of her driveway, her heels striking the pavement with sharp cracks. She didn't look toward the neighbors' houses this time. She knew they were watching, but she wanted this moment to be about her and us. She raised the binder in the air and shouted across the street. "This isn't over, Blake. You can hide behind your military record, you can laugh at the rules, but the HOA was created to enforce order, and order will be enforced. I stood slowly, setting my mug down. I walked to the edge of our yard, not raising my voice, but making sure every word carried. Karen, let me explain something to you. You think this is about rules. It's not. It's about respect. You've never respected the people in this neighborhood. You don't lead, you bully. That's why no one supports you, that's why you had to call the police for backup, and that's why today you were embarrassed in front of everyone. She shook her head violently, hugging the binder tighter. No. You don't understand. Without rules, there's chaos. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. People need structure. I took another step forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean in to hear. Karen, I've seen real chaos. I've walked through villages where families had nothing, where the only rule was survival. I've stood in places where no one believed tomorrow was guaranteed. And even there, people found ways to live with dignity, to look out for each other. You know what I learned? True leadership doesn't come from punishing people. It comes from protecting them. You're not protecting this community, Karen. You're suffocating it. Her lips trembled, but she tried to hold her ground. You think you're better than the HOA. You think you can tear up notices and ignore the rules. But you can't fight the system. The system always wins. My wife joined me at my side, her voice firm but calm. Karen, you keep calling the HOA a system, but it's not. It's just a handful of neighbors who got tired of your barking and gave you a title. It's not the law, it's not the government, and it's certainly not bigger than him. She nodded toward me, her hand brushing mine. You've met your match, and everyone knows it. From down the street, a few quiet claps started. A neighbor leaned against his mailbox, grinning. Another neighbor muttered, finally, someone said it. The small applause grew into a ripple of laughter and whispers. Karen's face burned red, her eyes darting from house to house, realizing she had lost not just the argument, but the audience. I raised my voice one last time, making sure she heard me clearly. Karen, this neighborhood isn't your battlefield anymore. If you keep pushing, if you keep harassing, you'll lose what little credibility you have left. And next time you think about calling the cops on us, remember the look on that officer's face when he recognized me. You don't scare us. You never will. For a moment, I thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. She clutched her binder tighter, her knuckles white, her body shaking. But instead of answering, she spun on her heels, stormed back into her house, and slammed the door shut again. This time, she didn't come back out. The street exhaled collectively, neighbors stepping onto porches, exchanging nods and smiles. A few even came over, one man shaking my hand. General, sir, I had no idea. But I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. We've all been waiting for this. Another neighbor laughed, she's been a nightmare for years. Seeing her shut down like that? Best Saturday I've had in a long time. My wife grinned, clearly enjoying the sudden shift in neighborhood politics. Well, looks like we're not the only ones who wanted to see Karen dethroned. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat back on the porch, the laughter of neighbors still echoing around us. My wife settled next to me, content. Do you think she'll really try again? She asked softly. I took a deep breath, gazing at Karen's darkened windows across the street. Of course. People like Karen don't quit. But from now on, she knows two things. First, that this family won't bow to her rules. And second, I paused, a faint smile tugging at my lips. That no matter how loud she shouts, the people she thinks she controls are no longer listening. The porch light flicked on, fireflies danced in the yard, and for the first time since we'd moved in, I felt the neighborhood exhale. The HOA's reign of fear had cracked wide open, and Karen's crown had been snatched from her head. As the night settled in, one truth lingered in the air like a promise: this wasn't her kingdom anymore.